With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Hill and Mr. Rudd, and gentlemen, the floor is yours. Please help make welcome Mr. Rudd and Mr. Hill.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. One thing he did not say, both my parents were teachers, and my wife, who is sitting over here, taught for 10 years. So I come from a family of teachers, if you will. A couple of months ago, Peggy Venable addressed this group, and I had the privilege of being here. She made some comments that I would like to address just briefly from my perspective. After I do that, Mr. Hill is going to talk to you about a number of issues with respect to the school. Then I'm going to follow back up and go over the school's financial issues and a bond proposal that we are going to bring before the voters in May. We're going to have some issues that Dennis is going to talk about very briefly, like security and CSCOPE and some of the things that are buzzing around. We would ask that you keep any questions that you have until the end, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. We're not trying to be evasive. If there's something else that you want covered, and there very well could be, we're more than willing to come back to another meeting, or we can set up a meeting over at the school and cover all of these issues. So we'd like to get your questions answered. Let me begin with some of Peggy's comments and just do it briefly. She said 85% of the Republican Party supports school choice. Dennis is going to address that in his comments. Llano ISD has $25 million in outstanding debt. Actually, I think her numbers were a little behind. The actual that we have, our principal that we have outstanding is $15,760,000. In fairness, if we don't retire any of the debt early, we will have about $4.6 million in future interest costs on that debt. It is our current intent that we will call some of that debt, probably all of it by 2017, so we will cut that interest off at some point at that date. And I'm going to make some other comments about that when I get down to the second half of this presentation. School spending increases should be limited to population growth plus inflation increases. That sounds good, but there's some problems with it. And let me just mention a few. Some of our expenditures, for example, diesel fuel, utility costs, increase faster than the consumer price index. We have to pay those. So just going up by inflation won't help us very much there. This formula does not cover increased testing costs, which are big. Dennis is going to cover some of that about our testing issues. So I won't talk about that. It does not cover the population increase in terms of the dynamics of it. We put about 85,000 new students a year in Texas schools. Most of that is Hispanic in terms of the growth. The standard that you have for our current students is not the standard that we have to have when we are bringing 85,000 students per year in, who many of whom, or most of whom, are economically disadvantaged, and many of whom do not speak English. And so we have a dual threat there in terms of being able to accommodate that, and we can't do it at nearly the cost factors that we would like to. Schools don't believe there will ever be enough money. Actually, we were doing pretty good up until this biennium. And I'll cover some of the reasons for the change. We weren't begging for money, but that's changed. Okay, now the biggest one that I want to cover with you, and this may be something that many of you will not understand. Dennis and I kind of have a running joke that we each edit the other's articles that are written, just so we've got them factual. So he will send his articles he puts in the paper to me, and I'll send mine to him. You know, kind of a fatal flaw type deal. We don't try to tell the other what to say, but we want to be sure that we are very factual. And Dennis knows that anytime he talks about an issue that's accounting related, he's probably going to get a comment from me. Not a criticism, but that's just the way it works. Okay, the comment is that only 40% of our M&O and INS expenditures goes to instruction. When you look at the financial statements of the Llano Independent School District or any other school district in Texas, if you look at line 11, it says instruction. Now, if you get anything out of this, and I doubt that a lot of people will understand it, but I'll be glad to try to give you an accounting education at a different time. That financial statement is not intended to, nor does it give you the cost of instruction in that school district. It is not a cost accounting number. And if you take the number off of the financial statements and try to say this is the cost of instruction and compare it, you are kidding yourself. Because that's not what that statement is intended to do. That is a position-related statement. If you are in the non-governmental world and had an organization like this, you would have an additional financial statement called functional expenditures, and it would do what I'm talking about. If any of you have audited financial statements out of one of the large charities like American Cancer, American Heart, or any of those, if you go to the back, they'll have a statement in there that will do just what I'm talking about that shows you how you get to those numbers. Schools don't do that because they told the legislature when you were doing all of this that they did not have the resources to do it. And in fact, there's a lot of the small schools don't have anybody who would understand how to do it because it does require some complexity of doing it. Okay, no business that I know of would take those financial statements and try to manage its business looking off of those numbers. So guess what? We don't do it either. That's not what we use. One thing Dennis Hill learned when he had to take 54 people off of the payroll back in 2003 was that you better keep up with people. And so he keeps a running list of all our employees and what their jobs are. So let's make it simple. You take your employee list and you go down it person by person and you say, what is this person doing? Do we need them? Can we do it differently? And that's what he does each and every year, and that gets reviewed in detail by the Board of Trustees. And if that is correct, those numbers on that financial statement then don't make any difference because they're not intended to do that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis and then I'll be back in a minute.
Thank you, Ronnie. Forgive me, I'm sorry with my voice. Typically I project pretty well. The other night, the basketball game, whatever's been in the air got me. So I've been struggling, so bear with me. What'd you say, you had $2,400 in your account?
Yeah, $2,412.
$2,412. Yeah, that's that ought to cover our speaking fee tonight. There you go. I want to go over, as you might imagine, I speak to a lot of groups, and I just want to kind of hit a hodgepodge of things that might interest you because many of these address questions that I typically get. Let me kind of go down through here. The last two reporting periods, Llano ISD was rated exemplary and recognized. We're one of the top schools in Class 3A, that's our size. Many of you may not know this, but Comptroller Susan Combs gave us the top award for financial transparency in 2012. If you have questions, give us a call or come by. We'll do our best to give you an answer. It's your money. They're your children or grandchildren. You deserve an answer, and we'll try to get you one. You've probably heard a lot about testing. It's a big thing in the news and the papers today. There are a lot of what's called end-of-course state assessments. They're given in certain courses. There are 15 of these in all. I suspect most of you are like me. You probably did not have to pass an exam to get out of high school. But our freshmen and our sophomores will have to pass 15 different exams to get out of high school with a high school diploma. Both the individual score and there's a cumulative score by subject that they must attain in order to graduate. We're test weary. In Texas public schools, I tell my staff, in Texas public schools, students are over-tested and under-assessed. Over-tested and under-assessed. The good news here is there are a lot of bills that have been filed that will drastically reduce, I think, the number of tests. I don't know any public school administrator that is necessarily against testing. We don't expect to take billions and billions of dollars in Texas public schools of your money and have no accountability. The question becomes, what's reasonable accountability? And when you have 40-odd days out of a 180-day school year that are dedicated to testing, in my judgment, the pendulum swung a little bit too far. There's another, in addition to a state accountability system, we also have a federal accountability system. That's known as Adequate Yearly Progress, or AYP in our vernacular. This says that by 2014, every student must pass every test that they take, or the campus and the district will be rated as failing. Every student has to pass every test. Nobody can, one student fails, this district is rated failing. I don't know of a business or an industry that's required to get 100% of the market. What if we applied this to some other institutions? Any firemen in here? Firemen? Got a fireman back there? If we applied this to that concept, by 2014 there couldn't be any fires break out anywhere. Again, what's reasonable? What's reasonable? What's happened to vocational training? I get asked that question a lot. When I was in school, and perhaps when you were in school, there was a big push toward vocational training. We now have in Texas what many of us believe is kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, don't we, Nancy? Yeah. They call it college and career ready, but the problem is they define career ready as those careers requiring a college diploma. That's the real issue. And so what has happened, vocational training for many of our students has kind of been pushed by the wayside as a result of two main factors. One is what we call the 4x4 curriculum. Every student must take 4 years of English, math, science, and social studies. So that leaves less periods for a student to have electives, and so there are fewer vocational courses that they can take. We also contributing to the problems that our kids have scheduling vocational courses is that we are required to remediate any state assessments that they failed. So many of these kids end up being placed in a course to remediate them in whatever state assessment that they failed, and again, they have even fewer opportunities to take vocational training. Let's talk about vouchers. Big deal in the news these days. A lot of emotional appeal tied to vouchers. And let me give you the disclaimer up front. I have nieces and nephews that went to private and parochial schools. They got a great education. I am not against private and parochial schools. What I am for, however, is a level playing field. So let me give you some questions. Let me just ask a few questions here for you to think about vouchers. One, they'll take money from public schools. Just no doubt about that. They're going to take money from public schools. Now, these questions. Will a private school that receives state aid be held to the same accountability standards as public schools? Will students at a private school that accepts vouchers be required to take the state assessments? Will homeschool students be eligible to receive vouchers? If so, will the state assume responsibility for monitoring and managing the educational process in the home? Will private schools that receive vouchers be required to report attendance? Will vouchers limit the ability to provide religious instruction in private schools? Will private schools retain the right to charge tuition above the value of the voucher? The last one. Are vouchers really a tax break masquerading as school choice? Let me say that again. Are vouchers really a tax break masquerading as school choice? We have school choice right now. About 70 of our students that live over in the east part of the county choose to go to Marble Falls ISD. Marble Falls accepts them, and they help them by sending the bus to pick many of them up. So we do have school choice right now. But these are some issues that are before our state legislature. I think this will be likely a legislative session that has the potential to have more impact on Texas public schools than any legislative session since 1949 when the Gilbert-Aiken Act was passed and created Texas public school districts as we know them today. You wanted me to address just a couple things before we get Ronnie up here. I've been asked to address school security. Just one second here. We met with, it's a really perplexing issue. How do you stop a shooter? Let me ask you a rhetorical question. You know, Ronnie's not, but many of you know me, and you know, I'm a pretty controversial member of our society over here, and so I'm a little concerned tonight. Now, what have you guys done to protect me tonight? Just a rhetorical question. You know, it's a terrible, terrible thing. Terrible thing when we have these school shootings, and I found the last one particularly egregious. You know, and I know that any of our students' lives are precious, but the last one in Connecticut seemed to me to be particularly egregious because of the age of the students. Now, I don't know about you, but it struck me that way. Let me put this in perspective for you. I did a little research, and the first school shooting that I could find was in 1927. And since 1927, there have been about 211 school shootings, resulting in about 321 deaths. The chances of a public school student dying from a gunshot wound inflicted on a public school campus about 1 in 156,000. The chances of that same student getting struck by lightning sometime in their lifetime is about 1 in 10,000. So the bottom line is, thankfully, it's a very, very rare event. My son, Cooper, who's a senior this year, has a 15 times greater chance of being struck by lightning than he does of dying from a gunshot wound inflicted on a public school campus. So that's the good news. But as a result of the last school shooting, we've had administrative review of our safety procedures with our staff. This has resulted in increased drills at all of our campuses. Had a meeting with the chief of police and our sheriff and a couple of their folks. They have graciously agreed to have increased patrols on all of our campuses in the district. We are pursuing expanding our radio communications at school. We have a radio communications network, and they are looking into being able to tap into that network so in the event of emergency we could communicate via radio directly with our local law enforcement officials. We are also working with our technology director, Jim Beasley. We have security cameras in our schools. Our principals use those from time to time. If there's an incident that occurred, they can go look at the camera. It records and kind of see what happened. Our technology director, Jim Beasley, is working and hoping to be able ultimately to allow our law enforcement officers the capability that if we had an emergency, they could plug into our network and be able to see down our halls and in our school facilities. We also have an Alert Now system that we purchased several years ago. So if we have some kind of school emergency, I can notify every parent or guardian in the district within about 3 or 4 minutes. So that has proven beneficial for us. The other thing that's come up of late, a lot of rumors circulating around is about the CSCOPE curriculum. A lot of misconception, misrepresentation there. I don't know Ms. Garner, and I feel certain that she probably doesn't know me. She's one of the people that send out some stuff about this. There are about 1,034 school districts in this state, and I can't tell you what happens in all of them, but I can tell you what happens in this one, okay? And I contacted our high school principal, Mr. Scott, and I said, Mr. Scott, would you get with our teachers that teach history and have them take a look at what these lessons are and see what they think? Mr. Scott got back with me, and they believe that these lessons that we're teaching our kids are fair